what's going on in the first two chapters of Nehemiah? Um, Nehemiah is he doesn't live in Jerusalem, but because of the Babylonian exile and all the wars that go on, he's probably a generation or two um, relinquished from the Babylonian exile. And Nehemiah is a governor of the Assyrian army, and it says he's cupbearer to the king at the end of chapter 1. And I want you to just remember that statement at the end of chapter 1. He says, "For I was cupbearer to the king." So at the beginning of chapter 1, his brothers come and tell him what's happened to the walls of Jerusalem. And so he hears this news, and what he does is a really good response. It's a godly response. Because I think we mess up this order a lot of times. The first thing he does is have an emotional response. It says he wept, and for days he fasted and mourned. So at the beginning you have an emotional response. So when we hear news, there is an emotional response that we always have. And when we hear the news, it's either joy, it can be sorrow, it can be anger, it can be, after watching the debates last night, befuddlement. So you have all these responses that when you hear news. And then the second thing he does after the response is pray. That he looks up to heaven and he asks God for not only guidance, but he repents as a nation of Israel of what they've done before, and help to put our eyes back on you. And so then he seeks help to the king. He asks help. He asked the king for help. I could not get it together. Too much coffee. He asked the king for help, and then he does the work. Now I think a lot of times we mess that order. Nehemiah, emotional response, prayer, asking for help, and then does the work. A lot of times we mess that order. We might get emotional response right. We got an emotional response, but we might have that response have unrighteous anger, overjoyed, and the second thing we do is probably don't pray. We have a response, and we follow that response, whatever we want to do, and if we get in trouble or if we come to a crossroads, then we might pray at the end. But a lot of times that's not our first couple of responses that we have to a situation, and prayer is not usually at the top of the list. Might be the last thing we do, but a lot of times it's not the first thing we do. And so he prays, and then the king notices that he is troubled, and he says, "What can I do?" Now he gets help. Now we have to remember, if you really look at it, the king doesn't have in southern vernacular, we would say the king doesn't have a dog in the fight, saying that he doesn't really need to help Nehemiah, but he gives that response to Nehemiah when he offers him, he sends correspondence to make sure that he can travel to Jerusalem in peace. There's not going to be conflict. He offers him timber. He offers him to help build the walls. He offers him a cavalry. That way he can go faster than if he did on foot. We have to keep in mind that from Susa to Jerusalem is probably in the range of 450 to 500 miles. So it's going to take him a while to get there. Now, why does a king who doesn't have a dog in the fight give him so much? Well, we have to understand that Nehemiah is what would be, I guess, parallel to today of It says he was a governor and cupbearer, and I'll talk about cupbearer in a moment. But there are two things. One is he's a high-ranking official. Probably, parallel it to maybe a colonel today, maybe even a general. And to get to that point, there has to be a lot of hard work and trust from the king. He has to prove his devotion to the king. He has to prove his willingness to work hard from the king. And we've all heard it before that there's no substitute for hard work. Hard work is valued. Not degrees, not anything like that. Hard work is always valued, and it was very valuable to the king. So that's one aspect that Nehemiah has going for him with his relationship for the king. The other one's trust. Trust is very, very valuable as well. When you say you trust someone, what does that mean? That you are willing to put a lot of things that you value into the hands of another human being. And it's reciprocal as well. When people say they trust you, they are willing to give a lot of things out of our value of them to the other person. That's why military is very important. You have to trust, if you go into conflict, you have to trust the other person, because you are literally putting your life in their hands, and the exact opposite. They have to trust you because they are putting their lives in your hands. And so at the end of chapter 1, Nehemiah says, "For I was cupbearer to the king." So not only does he have a high-ranking position in the Assyrian army, he is also cupbearer. Now, what is cupbearer? Yes.
He samples the wine.
Boom!
Yeah.
Exactly.
Keeps the king from getting poisoned.
Yes. Yes.
Falls over dead. That wine's bad.
Right. Right. That anytime, and Randy pretty much hit the nail on the head, anytime that he was in the presence of the king, I'm sorry, I need to shut this phone off. Anytime that he was in the presence of the king, a royal function, name it. And as Randy said, anytime the wine was poured in any function, he had to make sure that wine wasn't poisoned by, either it's smelling or tasting or whatever. That way the king does not get poisoned. If you notice that when politicians, candidates, incumbent politicians especially, if they go to they're stumping at a diner, for example, they might have a photo op and there might be food on the table, but what's the one thing that you'll never see that person do? Yeah, you'll never see the person eat the food, because they can't make sure 100% that food or drink is poison. And so that was the litmus test for Nehemiah as well, is that he has to make sure that the king is not poisoned. So the king knows Nehemiah is a very hardworking person. He knows that Nehemiah can be trusted with his life. And so he grants these requests to Nehemiah because of who he is. And we have to remember that as well, because we can earn favor with people by our actions, by our hard work and our trust. Whether within the church or outside the church or wherever, we can earn that favor. Now Nehemiah goes to Jerusalem, and what he sees is a lot of chaos. There are two groups I should say, who go into Jerusalem before Nehemiah. They are there, but there's a lot of chaos. There's no order. It's more of a societal breakdown. And that's important that Nehemiah, we went over trust, we went over hard work, and not only that, Nehemiah has experience. He has experience. He's seen the king. He knows how to deal with political views. He knows how to organize a society. He's seen that all through the eyes of the king, and he might have had to do it himself. So he goes to Jerusalem, and we'll read about that later, about organizing people, how to have a fair structure. So anyway, he goes to Jerusalem. He's there, and I want to pick up on chapter 2, verse 11. Nehemiah says, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I sat out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me, except the one I was riding on. By night I went through the valley gate toward the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in? Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Now, if you want to underline this at in your Bible, again, he seeks help. He probably travels for weeks. He gets to Jerusalem. He stays there for 3 days. He walks around the damage that has been done, and he gathers the people that are there. And this is his proclamation. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So this is going to be a 2-part devotion, and the next week we will do part 2. The first one is how we rebuild. The second part is when you meet opposition, because there are people in our lives, this is next week, but there are people in our lives who want to tell us no. You can't do it. It's impossible. But first I want to focus on rebuilding. 6 months ago, we had Vibrant Ministries here. We had a lot going on. And COVID has thwarted, I guess is a good word, thwarted a lot of the things, stopped temporarily all the things that we were doing. And it's hard, and I don't know if you've gone to the church. I walk in every day, but it's hard to come into an empty building. It's hard to go into the sanctuary and see it 1/8 full, 1/10 full. It feels like you're just there's damage that has been done. I used bad wording last night. I said, all the ministries we did, and I used the word obliterated, and I need to take that back, because obliterated is a bad word, because that means to be wiped forever. But there has been, the best word I can say is there has been damage. There's been a lot of damage, and it's not just here at the church, it's the people who were associated with the church. It was the people who met in groups. It was the people who had fellowship together. It was the people in Sunday schools. It was the people who went to Terrific Tuesday. And those bonds have been damaged. And so, yes, we have spent 6 months or so, and there has been a lot of emotion. And it's not just that. We had the emotional response. A lot of people were angry, sad, displaced, feel like a loss of identity, because I believe that's what Nehemiah probably went through. Even though he didn't live there, he had a sense of identity with Jerusalem. That's probably why he wept. And it's probably the same response if we had a pretend the house you grew up with in, and you remember that house, and you might not have lived there for decades, but there's value to that house, and if that house has been destroyed or damaged, you would probably feel a sense of your identity being lost. We sold, like for example, we had a lot of land and houses back in North Carolina with my family, and we've sold most of it. Doesn't, I wasn't going to go back there and live. Didn't mean, wasn't planning on it or anything, but there's just that sense of, well, I lost that. It's like a sense of identity. I have no property ties to North Carolina anymore. I'm a Floridian, but I still care about that community. And I think that's the same with Nehemiah, and I think that's the same with us here at Rosary. Is we care about this community, and when we hear it being damaged and all the things that are going on, and we can't meet like we should, or meet in person, or hug one another, there's an identity that's lost, I believe. So there is, of course, as we mentioned in Nehemiah, the emotional response. Lots of prayers that have been going on, probably a feeling of a loss of identity. But there has to come a time. We lost, and we lost a senior pastor. And we're getting a new one who is wonderful. And if you haven't met him, he's going to be really, really good. But there has to come a time, as in Nehemiah, where we gather everyone together and we say, come, we'll assess the damage, but we say, come, let us rebuild. And I think we're in this time right now where we get a new pastor on board. We are understanding the ways of video now, that we are going to have to reassess the damage and say, come, let us rebuild. So that's the devotional part of it. I'm going to shut this camera off. Y'all have a good day.